Hi. So I've gotten a couple messages after I posted about just like general information about rotation. Here, let me like text information about body movements. Like it's like reading a book on being an athlete. Like I understand I just told you the theory via words on a page, but I thought maybe it's actually easier for me to like show you what the difference is in different like shoulder versus hip driven rotation and kind of give you some illustrations and body movements to illustrate that. So here is like high level summary. So when a swimmer rotates, they rotate from their shoulders and or their hips. And so some swimmers are predominantly shoulder based, some swimmers are predominantly hip based, and some are like a 50-50 or like an uneven split, and that's totally fine. Um, in general, I would say like a lot of pool swimmers are actively like majority or fully shoulder rotation based, and a lot of distance swimmers drive from the hips for rotation. And the reason I generally recommend like at least 50% or greater being driven from the hips is because, especially for endurance athletes, like you want to protect your shoulders, you want to take as much strain off them as possible because they're already doing like a very repetitive grinding motion, and they are kind of the crux of whatever the rest of your body is doing. But if you can take some of the drive and the pressure and the stress away from your shoulders, like great. And rotation is such a major part of your stroke. Like I would say the two biggest aspects of being a efficient freestyler specifically are A, body position, which I can talk about in another video if people are interested, but also B, rotation. And the reason rotation is so important is because if you swim like a barge, you aren't going to be able to have enough range of motion to finish your stroke correctly. You're going to shorten your stroke because, again, range of motion. Your breathing is going to be a little bit harder and off. And in general, like you also end up pushing more water against you. Like there's more resistance because your body, like you're hitting flat, as opposed to like part of your body always being a little bit out of the water, which means air resistance a lot less than water resistance, right? So let me show you what I'm talking about, and maybe that will help a little bit. So I am going to illustrate. I'm going to stand back here and yell. Um, so when you are driving from your shoulders, you can essentially do this with your shoulders, right? And like your hips will follow. I'll move the camera down a tiny bit and move my chair out of the way. So my shoulders are turning and my hips are kind of stationary, like they're kind of following, kind of not. Please don't judge the mess. And so in this case, that's kind of the difference I'm trying to make. So if you're swimming and you're trying to rotate from your shoulders and your hips aren't really doing anything, that is causing a lot of torque on your shoulders, like these muscles specifically, your delts as well, like your little bicep tendons are going to be whacked out. Your chest is going to be doing a little bit too weird of work. It's unnecessary. And so if you're driving hip-driven rotation, is actually using your obliques. And so not to like scare you all, but and like welcome to COVID bodies, but I'm essentially using like from the middle of my torso, I'm using my abs, but I'm generally trying to drive my hip over. So like my shoulders are stationary, but my hips are twisting, right? Okay, my shoulders can't stay totally stationary because I'm not completely flexible. But you can drive your hips without your shoulders doing anything, right? And as your hips are driving, you can tell like your thighs and your knees and your ankles are almost like twisting a little bit too. And that's exactly what you want. And so that's kind of what the goal is. And like when you swim, if you have a chance to swim in a pool or outdoors, if you can figure out like what part of my body is working really hard to actually move my arms, because if it's your shoulders, like it will get really hard for you to do so. If you're not rotating at all, like you have a lot of opportunity. But if you're rotating through your hips, if you rotate through your hips, you can use your core and your obliques to pull your body from side to side, as opposed to your arms kind of like using gravity to throw you over, which can lead to injury very quickly. And so I want to show you what rotation can do. So imagine I'm in the water and like the water level is up here. And so if I'm flat, if I swim flat, this is as far as my arm goes. So I'll show you from here. I'm swimming flat, I'm doing this, right? And it's actually really hard. I'm gonna move this chair because that's really hard too, it's making it hard. But it's really hard for me to finish my stroke and to pull my arm over my body because I'm not opening up my body and allowing my torso to twist. I'm trying to open up my shoulders, which I don't know if you guys have really flexible shoulders, but I don't. And so like that's really hard for me. So instead, if you rotate your body, whether you rotate from your shoulders or your hips, if you manage to rotate onto your side, look what my arm just did. It was here, and I rotated, it's at least 6 inches. And if you rotate even more and stretch and push that shoulder and that whole arm forward, that's like 8 to 10 inches of additional stroke length that you can get per every stroke. On top of that, if you are rotating correctly, again, like you have one shoulder in the water, one shoulder higher out of the water, and that means all of this is not hitting water, so you have less resistance with your body. If you are staying in a really, if water efficient, kind of hydroplane situation right here, this beautiful tunnel, and if you stretch forward, your hand is going to be creating the entry to which it creates kind of like a dome where the water goes around your body as opposed to into it. And so if you notice here, like if I'm not rotating, there's this huge gap between my hands and my head. And so the water's hitting all of this and causing friction and resistance. But if I'm rotated onto my side, there's very little gap here where the water can essentially get stuck and push me backwards, right? And so like even then, like you're tightening up your stroke and you're making it into a smaller little tunnel, which means you'll go faster. A few other things, if you are rotating, so instead of coming here, you can actually push your hand out of the water so you can exit easier and more cleanly. You do not want a situation where you are trying to finish your stroke and then you're having to pull your arm out of the water. Like if the water level is like up here and your hand is down here and you're trying to like push water up to get your hand out, like you're ripping your hand out of the water, that's a huge amount of stress on your shoulders that you don't need. Like it's not helping propel you anymore. You're not going any faster because you're ripping your arm out of the water. So like if you rotate onto your side and you push that arm down towards your feet, so imagine my feet are like down there, and you keep pushing your hand, and then you rotate your body to get your arm out of the water, look how easy that recovery is. So hopefully that was a little bit more information about shoulder versus hip-driven rotation. The best way for you to identify whether you are a shoulder or a hip driving person in your stroke is to try and figure out like what is more sore and actually see like I'm going to assume this fits the only driving the twist from my hips, and it'll feel really funny if you haven't done it before and you're new to hip driven rotation, and that's okay. And so like you really try to like squeeze and like twist your core and it'll feel really weird, and that's great. And then other times you're like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to squeeze my butt cheeks together and keep my body planked and rigid. And I'm going to try to do everything for my shoulders. And you'll feel how different and how like much harder your shoulder rotation is compared to when you allow your hips to like really push you from side to side. And so what you don't want, just like quick note, you don't want a situation where you're sitting like this, right? Like this is not rotation. This is dancing, or this is wiggling. So this is rotation. You have an axis that goes through your spine. So like you're a globe and your axis goes through the top of your head, down your spine, and comes out between your legs. And you twist around that. This is rotation. You never want to break through your axis. So hopefully that helped. And I know this is a long video, but hopefully like almost 9 minutes of your time was well spent watching me on land describe swimming.